Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. Enter the shadows, where every whisper is a clue, and the line between justice and obsession disappears. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight we've got Troy Hillman. He is the author of Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. Troy, thank you for getting this book to me and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
I was skimming through, I believe I saw it on Instagram and it popped up and I thought it was such an interesting title and interesting cover. And I didn't know if it was actually fact or fiction just because of the zombie hunter part. Um, but what's really amazing is this is actually a true story. Let's start out with you and your background because you've got kind of an untraditional background as well. Tell me how you got into law enforcement.
Well, I was a CPA auditor for a large international firm in Chicago. And although it was a very good firm, and although I'd been kind of labeled partner material because of my performance on the CPA exam, that's not what I wanted to do. And I was miserable and I felt chained. So I wanted to escape. And I don't know if I had seen, my dad was a huge Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry fan. A lot of Charles Bronson growing up, just saturated with all the good 80s detective shows, Miami Vice, that kind of thing. So I think all those kind of sifted into my brain. And I said, I want to do something for maybe a greater good. And again, not to denigrate the accounting profession, because it is a great profession for some people. It just wasn't for me. I was just kind of bored in a cubicle.
Yeah, I really like the part in the book where you got an award for uh, doing such a great job. I believe your first year being a CPA, and you talked about your feelings, and it sounded like you just wanted to kind of crawl out of your skin and get out of the room. Can you can you give us some more about that?
Yeah, I mean, where I was from a smaller town. A lot of the officers were, and again, not to denigrate them, they were maybe high school jocks, or I just was not the prototypical beat cop material. Again, this college boy with the CPA. So again, I had this really rough time kind of owning up and looking at myself in the mirror saying, this is really what I want to do. Do I have the cojones to do it? And eventually I just did it. And I think my family, friends, they all thought I was crazy.
I think that's kind of a common story of people think you're crazy because you want to be a cop, and especially when you tell them that you want to work in homicide and spend the long hours and not sleep and treat your body like crap. Can you tell us what drew us to this case once you finally did become a detective and you're assigned to the homicide unit?
So I kind of fell into homicide by accident. I was kind of labeled more of a embezzlements, financial crimes guy, and kind of positioned my trajectory that way, certified fraud examiner, and worked in those details. But again, those weren't as fulfilling. And when I got the opportunity, I got tapped by the homicide lieutenant, who was very savvy. He had an IT degree. He loved spreadsheets. We immediately bonded, and he said, Troy, I need you to come over and get us organized. And that was in 2008. There were two detectives. There were over 2,500 cold cases. And doing the math, it was mission impossible. So I spent about the first 6 months saying, what did I get myself into? But then we started to rock and roll. I had help from above, getting me more talented people, and really started to recruit great, passionate bulldog type people to help to manage all these cold cases. So then Then along in 2011 comes the Canal murders, and that was something. It was actually a media records request that came across my desk. And as a sergeant, I wanted my detectives actually looking at cases and doing that kind of thing. So as a sergeant, I would typically pour through those cases to make sure that we didn't redact them, because we didn't want information. We wanted to be transparent, but we didn't want information out that could potentially sabotage the case. So I spent about, I always remember I got yelled at by the commander secretary for using tons and tons, reams and reams of paper and toner from the printer, printing out those massive investigations of the Canal murders. And I had to pour through them. And it was the fact that they'd never been solved kind of just didn't sit right with me at all.
Can you walk us through what you knew about the Canal murders before you really started to dig into it?
I just knew surface level that they were pretty horrific. One girl had been beheaded. The other one redressed. I didn't know a lot of the details. That one of the things that kind of resonated in the homicide unit and the whole department was he must be dead. He's been in the DNA system since the late 90s, early 2000s, and never hit. So, you're kind of wasting your time. This guy's dead. Move on. You have 2,500 other cases to look at.
I don't think that a lot of people appreciate that, because when they're reading books like this about serial killers or people that have done horrific crimes, they don't realize that the detective isn't just working on that one case. Even when you had your team together, you still were responsible for thousands of others, correct?
Absolutely. And the phones don't stop ringing. We can't just stop and work on one or two cases and tell the family members of all the other cases that, hey, we're just going to put those on hold, because every day that goes by on a cold case is kind of a bad day. So we need to work those kind of simultaneously but to take on this massive of an investigation was something daunting in itself, and then in the context of everything else.
So you talked about in the book about how when you made the decision to really tackle the Canal murders, you wanted to put together a team, and you handpicked detectives that you thought would mesh well and had certain skills. Can you talk about that team and why the people were selected?
Absolutely. One of the first things that my lieutenant said to me is, "Hey, Troy, you need to get the DNA scientist on board with kind of what you're doing." And to me, that was very easy, because there was a woman by the name of Kelly Merwin. I'd worked with her husband. He was a great officer, and she had a very similar supervisory style. So I called her the DNA expert, and she would almost, in essence, fast track cold case samples through to kind of help us, because she believed and was passionate about cold cases. So she was on board. Then we added William, who referred to as the PhD. He basically was great at talking to everybody, and he could get people to confess, and really even the worst of criminals to give information. So he was phenomenal. Mary Ann was the passionate one. Family members loved her. She just exuded passion and hard work. Then we added the kid who looked like he was maybe 18, but he was one of the most efficient detectives I'd ever seen as far as reviewing cases and solving cases. Then one self-proclaimed dominator, his name was Dom. He was phenomenal at also talking. He knew everybody on the department, and he could just talk to anybody, and that was a strength. And then last but not least, Clark Schwarzkopf, who had also worked major serial crime or serial killer investigation in the mid 2000s and solved it. He actually wrote a book about that too. So he was a major addition to the group. But all those people, there were others that helped, and I not to denigrate them, but those were the main team members that surfaced and really kind of forged through these investigations. It was a 3.5-year journey.
Yeah, and the book does a really good job explaining their roles and showing off all their talents, and I really appreciated that. Can you talk again? This is not just a typical murder, and I know that you said that one of the victims was decapitated, and another victim, she was dressed in, I believe it was a bathing suit afterwards. And there's some other odd things going on. At one point in the book, you described actually visiting the scene at night. And I believe you didn't even tell your supervisor about this because you thought that, he would think that's a bad idea. Can you talk about what it felt like being at that scene and being in that tunnel, and you're seeing the drawings on the wall? And can you kind of explain that?
Absolutely. What he did to these two women was horrific. And again, decapitation. He tried to cut one in half. He carved on them. He put basically initials into one and crosses, and just did awful things. Redressed, had postmortem sex, and to be there, even that it had been decades. I still felt like. So there was, the question was, had he been there recently? Because a lot of these serial killers like to go back and relive their kills as fantasy. And then B, just the chill of, awful, a head floating in the canal, or, he had thrown her head back in the canal 10 days after the murder. So it was uber creepy, but I had to get, it sounds crazy, I had to get close to the scenes, and I felt like getting out the pictures really didn't do it. There were hundreds and hundreds of pictures, 35 millimeter back in the day, that didn't really make sense to me. So I wanted to get out there and feel the scenes, so to speak.
Your first impression after you reviewed the file and you go to the scene, what do you think the killer would have looked like, or what do you think some of the traits he would have had as far as a profile is concerned?
Well, I think we all believed on the team that he was very proficient in his kill. Both girls had a stab wound to the back, which immediately incapacitated them, basically drove it through their lung, their aorta, and their heart, basically. So good thing is they didn't suffer. But so it was a very proficient killer. So I think we leaned to, and the fact that he was not seen, he got away with it. He spent a lot of time at the scene. Was, hey, this guy is not just military, but kind of a military badass, that maybe somebody in special forces, maybe your Delta, maybe Ranger, SEAL, that comes to mind. And not to denigrate the armed forces, but we had to look at everything kind of holistically.
And that made sense because you had an Air Force base near the location, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We have on the western edge of town, we have a huge Air Force base, Luke, that's not that far of a drive from the crime scenes.
Another aspect of this I found fascinating is the symbols that were carved into them, and as well as the pictures on the wall. You didn't know if there's any religious symbolism going on, or what were your thoughts on that?
Well, learning kind of what we did along the way, a lot of these, and knowing that a lot of these serial killers like to taunt the police, there were a lot of kind of clues that he left that seemed to be taunting. And I spent, and as well as the team, a lot of time trying to figure out what he was trying to tell us and how it could lead back to him. Including, we went and talked to a medical legal death examiner. We talked to a religious expert at Grand Canyon University. I mean, we just went untraditional, trying to figure out what is he trying to tell us with the clues.
At what point did you decide, okay, we're going to have to break this up into small chunks? And I believe you started from, you put some of the detectives on A, and then you put some on Z as far as working suspects. Can you kind of talk about the workload, how you distributed that out into your team, and what that looked like?
Sure. The files were massive. They were in the basement. They were in file cabinets next to detectives' desk. They were just kind of strewn all over. They weren't lost, but it was just a mess. So I had an organization detective, and I forgot to mention he was vital. His name was Mark, and he looked like the most disorganized person on the planet. But when you really kind of drilled into and looked at things, it was all kind of a facade. He was one of the most organized, efficient people that I knew. So he organized a list that we kind of affectionately called the Creepy Canal List. And there was literally hundreds and hundreds, almost 1,000 names on this Creepy Canal List of really kind of bad dudes. So we needed to kind of sift through them. So we decided Clark was going to take the A's, I was going to take the Z's, and we're going to meet in the middle. And then we'd sift those out and give those to the detectives, Marianne and William and JJ and Dom, to basically go and travel and get their DNA. And that was no easy feat because of all the different jurisdictional requirements in each state, whether or not you have to have a full-blown search warrant. You're looking at sometimes on a cold case, a judge won't sign something if it's 20 years old. If you don't have enough probable cause. So, and you know, with your law enforcement background, it's just, sometimes it's trying working out of state. Usually the officers are willing to help you, but it's the laws and sometimes the judges that you're kind of working against.
Yeah, the book did a really good job of having a lot of those stories in there because it was very impressive, just the amount of man hours it took to do every one of these suspects. And a lot of times your team would get really excited about someone, and especially the dominator would be, this is the one. And then Kelly would have to break the news and kind of be the, the bad guy in a sense of, letting everyone down. Can you tell us a few of those suspects and kind of go through the ones that you thought were really promising?
Yeah, so we always start a cold case investigation with who we missed in the initial report. And I always tell people this was pre-DNA, really. This was kind of 92, 93, these murders happened. DNA really didn't start to really rock and roll per se until the late 90s. And then that's when the FBI had the CODIS database, 1999, 2000. So then that they could be national, basically matches of cases of profiles. So yeah, exactly. We would just try to get as many as possible with those barriers and give them to Kelly, because she kept saying, that's how this case is going to be solved, is you're going to have to give me the right DNA. But one of them, which really sticks out initially, was in the actual report, was the first victim, Angela's professor. He was special forces. He had been called in multiple times into the Creepy Canal List, so to speak, basically saying that he would go into fits of rage and start crying when anybody mentioned her name. He seemed had really made some odd statements to the detectives when they flew out to LA to interview him initially. So there were just a lot of things. And when we flew back to, I believe it was Maryland, and got his DNA, he acted super weird. And so Marianne kind of handled that one, and she really, each of us kind of sunk our teeth into different individuals, and we did collectively as a team too. But yeah, the devastation when you hear it's not him, keep going, from Kelly. I mean, I joked that I called her the lead killer because we just kept crossing names off the list that we'd get excited about during this 3.5-year journey.
Yeah, that's such a long time, and I don't think that people really think about that when you're reading this book, is just really how long this takes. I thought you did a really good job of putting a lot of those cases in there, just kind of show that the journey and the hardships of getting your hopes up, and then how that affects the team and the team morale. As a supervisor, how were you keeping up the morale, or did it ever dip? Is this something that you had to push, or was your team just always bouncing back and going after the next one?
Well, yeah, there were certainly times when things got all these, as you know, officers, detectives they're human beings, and we have families of our own, and we have things happening in our own families, and then coming to work and shutting all that down and trying to work through myriads of phone calls and going to court appearances and balance all that. And then hearing, over and over, it's not him, it's not him, it's not your guy. that was, kind of devastating. But I think I recruited what I used to have an English bulldog, and his name was Steve. I loved him because he would never let go of the rope. He just, even if you'd hold him in the air, he would never let go of that rope. So that's what the kind of, on the team, they were bulldogs, and they knew this wasn't going to be easy going in. And we knew there could be a chance that we wouldn't solve it, that everybody would kind of be right, that maybe he was dead, maybe he was in a mental institution. But we all knew we had to try. We had to try for those women and their families.
Can you tell us about, there's a group that gets involved of law enforcement experts, and you petition to get the case reviewed by them. Can you tell us about that story and how it came about and who was on that panel?
Yeah, William came into my office one day and said, "Have you ever heard of the Vidocq Society?" And they're out of Philadelphia. And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Well, they're the modern day Sherlock Holmes is kind of what they call themselves." And we started to kind of, initially it had been a mother wanting us to look at her son's case. And unfortunately, this society has rules about which cases they'll take. So we tried that one and they said no, but then they said, we kind of offered up the Canal murders. And what they do is they basically, it's a group of what I call the upper echelon of law enforcement. They're brilliant people, NCIS, FBI, basically there's some local law enforcement, there's religious scholars, there's every kind of expert that you would want. There was even a bug doctor who could figure out how long a person had been deceased. So this group was fabulous. And for them to say, "Hey, we'll fly you back on our dime, on their dime, basically, to present a case," that we were excited to the point where they'd fly 2 detectives. And I wanted my case agents, Marianne and William, to go. But I also asked if I could go because I knew it would be a career highlight. And they said, City of Phoenix said, "We won't pay for it." And I said, "Well, can I pay for it? Can I go?" And they said, "Yeah." So they were gracious enough to give me some vacation time or some city business time. But all in all, we went, and it was, I'll leave that for the book. But we ran into a very interesting situation and a profiler named Richard Walter.
Yeah, and Richard Walter, not to give it away, but he's very eccentric, I think would be fair. And he had some really interesting words and phrases that he would use, like "me think." But he was also really brilliant, and I know that you learned a lot from him. Can you talk about a few of the lessons that you learned from him as far as what to look for in serial killers? And I know he had a spectrum or categories that he kind of placed them in.
Yeah, he had different subtypes of serial killers, and he kind of explained each one. And one of the things he told us right from the get-go was he said, "You're looking at a Dahmer or Bundy." And I was like, okay, well, we kind of thought that, but to hear him say it at his level was kind of scary. We also, one of the things he had this helix, he called it. And you're right, it's a continuum. Basically kind of taught us how these individuals develop over time and kind of some of their behaviors that will lead them to engaging in this kind of serial crime. And it was kind of scary how, he described, fraudurism and voyeurism and the different things. And some of the things I had to look up because piquerism was one that I was like, what is that? And you're kind of afraid I think I'm a reasonably intelligent guy, but kind of afraid to ask these brilliant people, well, what does piquerism mean? And let me bust out my phone. But it was the cutting, just the experimental cutting on victims. But he told us our guy would work his way up and may even be a cannibal.
And I'm not going to give it away, but he did say that the suspect would be in the files, which that's got to be a relief for you because you've got so many people telling you that the suspect's dead and you've been investigating this case for years and you still haven't been able to find him. did your approach change after that meeting as far as your investigative team strategy?
Well, we went because we kind of wondered if the individual would be in the files, and then that kind of solidified it. And we went kind of, to go with a Vegas term, we went all in on what he told us, and we started really sifting through those files and eliminating as best we could, from Clark working from the A's and myself working from the Z's. And then, but each one of those took a long time to not only sift out and then to give to a detective to go get the individual's DNA. And they may be dead, they may be clear across the country. And that took a lot of time to plan out their travel arrangements and get the upper chain of command to buy off on sending them there and that kind of stuff. So it was daunting. There were so many names. But yeah, exactly. We had at least kind of a flashlight of hope, a guide to that we were moving in the right direction.
How was your upper echelon of command with this case? Were they very supportive? Were they getting frustrated? Because this has to, I mean, you're taking away a lot of resources and a lot of time, not to mention processing DNA. You're taking away from Kelly's time. Did anyone ever encourage you to stop or to hold back, or we're going to take away, we need these guys to do something else? Because I assume that you're continuing to get murders and other cases that are stacking up. Was there any pressure there from your command? Or
yeah, absolutely. But we were lucky that we had kind of, not to brag in any, but we had established kind of a high bar where we were knocking arrest for 12 to 15 cold cases a year prior to even starting this, back to the 70s. So we were known as highly functioning and could handle this type of extra work. So I'm very happy the team continued to function at a high level. We continued to make arrests. We continued to do everything we needed to. There was one point where I think the original lieutenant who had brought me over was no longer there. He had promoted, and the lieutenant that took it over was really good. He was a nice guy, but I don't know if he wasn't the same. And he thought maybe I was becoming a little too obsessed, which we could argue that I was, because we had that bulldog mentality of not giving up. I think we wanted to figure this out, especially with the clues and whatnot.
It was really I was very impressed with your wife and all this too, because you had a young child, or you had a child during this time. And I know how that is, how stressful that is. And your wife seems to be like Wonder Woman and just lets you do your thing and lets you do your job, which is so impressive, especially because in law enforcement, you have a starter wife. Most guys have a divorce or two. Can you tell about how supportive she was and how important she was in this investigation?
She's a nurse, so hardwired into her as caring, and she was always had faith that we would solve it, and always kind of gave me that kind of boost when I would get down and say, I'm going to be in a nursing home before we figure this out, that kind of thing. So yeah, she's awesome, a very resilient person, and kind of believed in me. And believed in the team. So yeah, we went through some trials and tribulations. We had a baby, and I wanted to be a very involved father, and I spent many nights, late night feedings, and I couldn't help but thinking about this case and other cases. But yeah, she was very supportive, and I hope I exclaimed that in the book, how much of a strong woman she is and how much she did for me.
Yes, and that was very impressive. And again, I think that a lot of wives would have not been that supportive. To be honest with you, they would probably have been frustrated with the amount of time that you're spending on this, because you really have to be obsessed to solve a case like this. I mean, this is, a lifetime commitment to something that you may be chasing someone that's dead. And that happens all the time with these cases. What kind of toll was this case taking on you personally? Were you able to manage your stress?
Yeah, I've always been a type A driver, so to speak, personality. But yeah, it definitely, I try to stay in good physical shape. That's always been important to me. But it did get dicey with having young kids because you don't want to take away from them. So I think officers go through, it's not easy to put on that badge and kind of close off everything and then come home and be super dad and wall off all those emotions, all those bad things you see at work. So, I definitely think I have a few, more grays, and it does take a toll on you.
Can we go into when you actually find the person responsible for these murders and what were some of the things that led you to them? I know you want to save some for the book, or people have to buy the book. And again, you can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes Noble, Kindle, Audible, wherever you can buy a book. But can you tell us about that piece of it without going into too much detail?
Yeah, this guy was no normal Joe Blow. He kind of became a Hollywood story, so to speak, of his own by just who he was and what he was doing. He was driving an auctioned off, looked like an LAPD black and white uh, police car, and he was driving that around, and he decorated it. It said the Zombie Hunter on the back, and he had a bloody mannequin in the back, and it complied with state law. He would get pulled over typically, but because he had a certain color, he would basically comply and not get a ticket. But he was definitely looked at by patrol officers as who's this guy, and is he impersonating a cop? But he would go to, he was heavily into cosplay and would go to cause events basically as a zombie hunter, and people knew him, they revered him. He was taking pictures with the police, unbeknownst that he was a serial killer in reality. So yeah, it was crazy, and the social media, just a ton of stuff, and the kind of the deviancy, and again, the search of the home. There's so much to this that we got into and we found out about him.
So there are certain aspects of the murder which you'll have to get the book to read about, and that goes into great detail. That you thought that this person was you described him, I believe, as like a Rambo, someone that is really fit and incredibly strong. When you see the zombie hunter guy, we'll call him, um, did he match that picture to you?
No, and especially rewind to back to the point where he was the murderer, back to the point where the murders happened in 92 and 93. He was this scrawny, Dahmer-looking kid with glasses, nerdy, and nowhere near what we had pictured as a Rambo or Schwarzenegger or somebody like that. That basically was this badass killer. He was not. Fast forward to the zombie hunter. Yeah, he put on a little weight, was a little bit healthier, but he still didn't really match up to that special forces kind of badass.
Was there any disbelief that it was actually him when you started linking things together? Like, was your team doubting this? Because it really, like what you're saying, his physical appearance really doesn't match with what you would think, would be your suspect that you've been chasing for years. And especially his age at the time. Was your team on board with him, or were they still skeptical?
I think we were on board based on the totality, use law enforcement terminology, the totality of the circumstances. Basically, everything that we could find in his criminal history, everything that we could find on social media, and then looking at the collective zombie hunter fellow. But there were also we were also kind of like, how did this little skinny guy, if he did do it, how did he do it? And that is a question, which still remains unanswered.
I'm not going into too much detail because I want to save for people that are actually reading this, and you need to go get the book. But at some point, you do decide to get his DNA. Would you mind telling us about that? Because I thought this was just genius. Do you mind giving that spoiler?
Yeah, not at all. So we would basically, it was around the holidays, and a lot of our very talented, I call them the sneak and peek detectives or the sneak and peek officers, where they're able to do surveillance and do it really well. They were off or traveling or whatnot. So it came down to my detectives doing the surveillance. And he happened to be working at an Amazon facility. And he had a kind of a low level packing job or whatnot. And he would come out on his breaks, he'd blast his music, sit in the zombie hunter car. And we were hoping that he would either, flick a cigarette or he'd discard some DNA, a cup, whatnot. And he never did. And I remember the night that Clark, it was his idea, he called me. And he was the serial killer detective, I called him, phenomenal experience and just a no nonsense kind of guy. And he said, he's sick of this. He wants to implement a plan and he wants my blessing on it. And basically it was to set up a job interview and get this guy on board. And in fact, he set it all up and we kind of sat there at the restaurant and we were able to get his DNA, but there's a whole bunch of curveballs that came into play and a whole bunch of nerves. And it ended up working out. But yeah, it was crazy, but it was a brilliant ruse to do. And the credit deserves, Clark. And this was a team approach.
Yeah, I thought that piece was amazing and really good thinking on their part. And I really love how, as a supervisor, you encourage your detectives to go and be creative to find solutions to really complex problems like that. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
So you're able to take him into custody, and I thought that it was really cool listening to William do the interview. I know that you're listening in. Can you tell us a little bit about how that interview went, and especially how the things that you were looking for as far as like how the suspect was controlling the interview, and not to give it away, but things that serial killers may do in that situation?
Yeah, we were watching on a big screen television in the conference room, and you could hear a pin drop as we all kind of clung to this because we knew that we had him, but we were hoping that he would give us that much more, a full confession, and then let us know what other kills he had done, and kind of put a bow on it, so to speak. But we had also been told by the profiler that we worked with the Vidocq Society. He said this is not going to be easy. He's going to talk to you, but he's going to play with you. And we picked William strategically because he was the PhD detective, the plain high school diploma guy, that just unassuming, but very, very intelligent, very cunning. And we figured that he could talk to anybody. So we sent him in there and he did a hell of a good job, basically trying to take Brian down and really kind of unlock him. But Brian, a lot of these subtypes that Richard, the profiler, told us about are very, very intelligent, and they know they're kind of it's a game to them, and that's what it was. It was basically a kind of a high level chess match.
What was the suspect's demeanor during that interview? Was he calm? Did he stay collected?
Yeah, very meek, calm, just kind of would love to talk about when William would talk to him about cars or bikes or anything that he liked to talk about. He kind of became a chatty Cathy. But then when William kind of pressed him on some other things, he kind of would clam up. But yeah, he plays a very meek, just nice guy and I think it's a big act, but he plays that really, really well.
What would be the difference between a serial killer like that being interviewed and just Joe Schmo that committed a murder? Can you give us any examples of how a typical person charged with murder would act compared with the serial killer that was sitting in front of you? Because I would think that a lot of people too may lawyer up at some point, right?
Yeah, and that was kind of our worst case scenario. But from what the Vidocq Society told us and the profiler, that he wouldn't, that he would play a game with us, and that not, no pun intended, but that played out. So yeah, it was a what I would call a hellacious chess match, and William did a fabulous job on that. But yeah, it's your average Joe will typically either use a lot of the same thing. They'll bring in a lot of religion, like Jesus would never let me do that, or I swear, on my hand on the Bible. They'll use a lot of terminology like that. They'll deflect. But this guy just tried to literally maneuver William, and William wouldn't let him.
So after the interview, you get a search warrant for his property, and he's got a house that is absolutely disgusting. And at some point, you go to the house, and you've got a team of detectives, another team of detectives that are doing the search warrant. And for those that are listening that don't really know what's involved in a search warrant, you have to go room by room and go through every little piece, because they're looking for, I assume you were looking for evidence from the crime scene. I know that like some Walkmans had been stolen. You're looking for diaries, journals. And this guy has, from my understanding, newspapers and pizza boxes and rat droppings are all over this place, right?
Yeah. In fact, our SWAT team, when they went in, they couldn't even breach the door because there was various boxes, trash, garbage that were piled about 3 to 4 feet high. And there was just small walking spaces to allow Brian and disturbingly his 15-year-old daughter to walk around the place. So yeah, it was an absolutely vile. And in fact, those detectives still give me crap about it. They say it took years off their lives being in that home and going through it painstakingly.
That brings up another point. What happened with the daughter in all this? Because he gets taken into custody. The house is disgusting. Was Child Protective Services, did they get involved, or did another family member take custody of her?
Yeah, she was what I would consider another victim of all this. She was a very intelligent, very nice girl, had a promising future, but she was living with a serial killer. And some of the stuff that we found that she was maybe drawing and was kind of on another level disturbing. So we basically, got Child Protective Services involved, and then placed her with her mother, and her Brian's ex-wife. Her mother had a very difficult divorce, and I think his ex-wife was deathly afraid of him for probably all the right reasons. But for whatever reason, the daughter was left with him in his custody. And people ask me about that to this day, and I just feel bad for her.
Yeah, I felt bad for her too. And there's several victims in this, and you did a really good job of tracking down his past girlfriends, which was really odd to me when I was thinking about it, that someone that has a house like that and is really weird had multiple girlfriends. Was he just able to hide all of that in front of them, or how did that process work? And what were they like in person?
What is the old saying? There's someone for everyone, or something like that. So I think they maybe found his zombie hunter and his love of cars and his love of cosplay and that kind of stuff. They enjoyed that, and kind of overlooked a lot of the disheveled nature of how he lived. And then maybe I think he did a really good job at painting himself throughout his life as a victim. I think they felt sorry for him. And I think it's typically sometimes in a woman's nature to certain women that'll be attractive. They'll want to help and fix them and help the victim, that kind of thing.
Speaking of victims, after you did realize what type of person he is, I know that you were worried about that there were other victims out there. And there was, I believe, an autistic girl that was a Girl Scout that was going around and selling cookies. And you looked into that case as well. Can you touch base a little bit about that case? And
yeah, there was some, basically he told his ex-wife in kind of a bombshell, and during her interview, we did her interview simultaneous to his interview. She told us that he had basically, a Girl Scout had been collecting for money and knocked on his door, and he pulled her inside and killed her. And she kind of went into details that were very, very disturbing. And that matched with she was not actually a Girl Scout, but she was a missing person, Brandy Myers, and she had been collecting for her school book drive. And for whatever reason, her sister, who still feels awful to this day, and shouldn't, but she did not go with her that day. And that murder lines up perfectly with our missing person case, and we never found the body. The missing persons detectives, Stu Summershoe, he did a fabulous job on that case and submitted it to the county attorney. And unfortunately, a no-body homicide, as you know, is really difficult. So they didn't file on it because it was just circumstantial.
how many other bodies do you think he's responsible for?
I would say, based on his behavior and based on what I know, 10 to 20.
Do you know when it started?
There's a case out of Tucson that I looked at pretty hard, and my team, that was right before in 92. So I think a lot of his activity, and that's when Brandy Myers was 92. That's when our first victim was 92. I think it started right around the murder started in 92, but I will rewind the clock. I mentioned this, he basically got on a bus when he was 17 years old, and he stabbed a woman in the back. And that was in his file. So I think this deviancy started in his teens, and everything that the profiler said, him working his way up the helix, he did exactly that. He worked his way up.
Do you want to get into the trial and what happened with that?
Sure. What I thought was agonizing was we arrested him in 2015. Took about 8 years to get it to trial. And that was time that the families, just agonizing for them. And it was a lot of, some of it was COVID and the shutdown of the courts, but some of it was not political, but defensive maneuvering. And it was a capital murder case, so those are inherently slow. But to take that many years was disheartening. But it eventually went to trial. He waived his right to a jury for whatever reason, and he decided to go in front of a judge. And the judge he drew was a judge by the name of Suzanne Cohen. She is a former sex crimes homicide bureau chief, and she was very, very fair, but hard-nosed. She, again, had a very fair, impartial trial. But what was sad about the trial, and I sat in on a lot of it, William was there every day, was that the prosecutors did a fabulous job. And the defense attorneys did too for their role. But what it seemed like was Brian was the victim, that our girls were not the victim, and it was truly Brian Patrick Miller, the zombie hunter, was the victim because his mom had abused him and he had this horrible upbringing.
So after that long of a time, you obviously had I believe William retired before the trial actually started, right?
Yeah, he came back because he was so invested in this case, as we all were, and he wanted to make sure that the trial proceeded, and that the prosecutors needed a lead agent to basically help with anything to support their role. So William was right there. And again, yeah, the stellar. I cannot say enough about this team, and they're still near and dear to my heart. And I hope in the book I brought them to life, and their personalities and their quirks and all the good.
Yeah, you did. I thought you did a really good job. And again, this book does not just cover one single case. There's a ton of suspects that pop up, and the book does a really good job of following those people and like why they are such good suspects, and not going to give it away, but there's a lot of twists and turns that come around. What's really disheartening is after this case, the cold case unit gets disbanded, right? And you
Yeah,
get sent back to patrol.
yeah, we were kind of overjoyed to be able to solve, kind of come up with a recipe of tackling this massive caseload and figuring out how to review cases and that, and then kind of culminating with the arrest of a serial killer who everybody said was dead. And then, we flew back to Chicago, got a national award, and we were just joyous, joyous for the family, joyous, for what we had done, that kind of thing. And then to get a call from a commander who was retiring in 2 weeks to say, "Hey, Troy, you're going back to patrol." And I had almost a decade spent of my life trying to build this cold case squad, and just at the stroke of a pen to say, "Oh, we've got budget cuts, you're going away," was just so disheartening. And I bleed Phoenix. I'm supportive of Phoenix PD. I think they're a great organization, but that was one of the dark moments in my career, and it really hit me hard. And especially having young daughters and having to look at that and go back to patrol when we had done everything that they'd asked us to do. It was just disheartening beyond disbelief. The good thing is a lieutenant knocked on my door about 3 or 4 years later and said, "Hey, we messed up. We need you to come back and fix it. Would you do that?" And so I'm not God's gift to cold case, but I said happily, yes, I will get us back up and running. And I call it the cold case part due. We jumped right back in, a different set of detectives, but equally as good and solid. And we were able to start knocking down more cases and using forensic genealogy, which was the tool that we'd started, and basically we're able to use that to continue as a tool in the toolbox to solve more and more cases.
Yeah, and again, I thought that aspect of it was extremely interesting, and I think people that enjoy shows like CSI will really get into it. People that enjoy movies that are kind of around like that national treasure. I know it sounds really odd, but just looking at the symbolism of things and trying to put that together, especially on the victims' bodies, and you're trying to figure out like what these letters mean, and going through that whole process. I think people really enjoy that because it was it really kept you on the edge and had you guessing as well. So I think they'll appreciate that. What are you doing now? I see that you've got a Cold Case Matters placard that you've got hanging. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so I'm a consultant. I try to help and kind of lobby for cold case squads, and the necessity keep leaders and on their toes to properly staff cold case squads, because it's not only did it happen to us, but it seems like a lot, where they just go in and say, "Oh, what should we cut? Oh, let's just cut cold case homicide or cold case missing persons or cold case sexual assaults." And my mantra is, no, those are important. We should get our priorities straight. Our priorities should be on solving murders and solving sexual assaults and solving missing persons. These other things that we're doing, yeah, they're also needed, but they're not as important as solving murders. So that's kind of what I advocate for. And I came up with the slogan, "Cold Cases Matter." I'm a volunteer with Parents of Murdered Children. I'm very close with the local chapter. and I believe in them and support them because it's horrific for anybody to have to be a survivor and then to just wait on an agency to finally get around to looking at the case. So I get their staffing concerns, but we've got to do better.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, which is why we wrote our book, which is A Murder on Campus, the professor, the cop, and North Carolina's most notorious cold case. And that is about the murder of Virginia Olson in 1973 on the campus of UNC Asheville. And currently, Asheville Police Department only has 2 part-time cold case detectives reviewing all those cases. So I believe you had 2,500 cases.
At the time, I always say that was 2008, and you're adding probably 100 each year at least.
Right.
But you're 50% solve rate, maybe 60, 70 if you're lucky. But you're adding all those cases. So just Phoenix alone has over 3,000 now, which is scary. And then you have all the outlying agencies, and then you have a statewide problem. And I'm sure this is everywhere because we had other agencies from around the country calling us saying, hey, we saw you in the media. What are you guys doing? How are you tackling this problem? And that's where I would love to train and help and get involved. But as you know, there's a healthy amount of ego in law enforcement, and they're not always inclined to ask even a brother or sister in blue, so to speak, because their ego. They don't want to say, hey, I screwed up, or I overlooked this guy, or something like that. So to me, just breaking those walls down and having communication and saying, hey, I need help, kind of like we did with the Vidocq Society, is huge, and it needs to be done.
Yeah, I completely agree. When did this turn into a book for you? When was that decision made?
When they cut the squad, after it was 2017, because to me, the Canal murders and our 3.5-year journey were the poster child of never giving up, why cold cases matter. So I'm like, I said, my mom was an English teacher. I want to write a book and tell the world why this is important. So I started working on it, but it was difficult. It's one thing and not to denigrate people who self-publish it. That's become a definite avenue, but I wanted to publish at a higher scale, and to be a first-time author by one of the big New York houses is difficult. So I had a lot of rejections, and that took a long time. Luckily, I had an agent that took a chance on me. She's fabulous and loves the true crime stuff. And then it took her about 1.5 years to pitch it to, and luckily Pegasus Crime is phenomenal. They took on the book. They're part of Simon Schuster. So just stoked, but it's taken about 8 years to get this thing finally published. And it's right around the corner. My wife keeps telling me it's going to be here. It's going to be here eventually. And I'm just sitting there waiting, and I've never been an exceptionally patient person. So it's been agonizing just waiting.
Well, you did a great job with it. And the book, again, is Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, the true story of a small town accountant and an elite group of detectives in Arizona's most terrifying cold case. Troy, they can get the book in October 7th, but you can pre-order it now. And like we were saying before, you can go ahead and pre-order it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can go to your local bookstore. They can order it on a program called Ingram. You've also got a Kindle and Audible version available. And we said this before the show, but I can really see this turning into a movie or something on Netflix, because it really is an incredible story. So I'd encourage people to go pick that up. Troy, thank you very much, and have a good night.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.